I come from a very rural part of East Tennessee. It ain't exactly what you'd call the sticks, 'cause there is a large city about 20 minutes away. But you could still get lost on those winding roads surrounding the house I grew up in. It would take someone familiar with the areas to help you get out and back on your way to civilization. Behind my house was a steep incline, and at the bottom of that incline was an old sawmill run by Elmer Nicely. The train tracks ran right along Elmer's sawmill, and when a train would come through about once an hour, all the windows in our house would tremble for about 10 minutes. Elmer also slaughtered hogs at his place, so it was awfully nice when a train came by and masked the squeals we'd sometimes hear from his small wood slaughterhouse. There was a one-lane gravel road that cut between our house and the sawmill. I'd see cars pass through there at all hours of the day and the night. But when I was a kid, I'd never been far down that old road. It just looked scary down there to me. The trees and the kudzu was overgrown, and the road looked like a path into a dark tunnel of leaves and vines and sticks and dust. I knew some people lived down that gravel road, but I didn't know anyone personally. They were mostly reclusive country people who liked to keep to themselves, and I wasn't going to go messing with them. Once when I was a kid, I had a dream that terrified me, more so than any dream I've ever had. I dreamed that a man broke into our house and tried to kill my entire family. That man's face haunted me for years. He was a lanky, middle-aged man with greased back black hair, leathery skin, and bad teeth. A few years after that dream, I was in our backyard and saw an old light blue Chevy come speeding down the gravel road. The driver looked straight at me as he passed, and my heart moved right into my throat. He had the exact same face as the man in my dream. I was petrified. I'd see this man pass the house many times after that, and every time my body would tremble. And one day, I never saw that man again. When I got older, my parents would let me walk down the old gravel road by myself. I remember the first time I went down past the sawmill, past the slaughterhouse, and found where that old road bent to the left, crossed the railroad track. At that point, I couldn't recognize any of the surroundings. It's like I was in some new, small backwood village. There was old, broken-down, rusted trailers that people still lived in, nestled way back in the brush. There's so many old houses I'd never seen before. They looked like they'd been pieced together with scrap wood and plastic and cardboard. There was an old creek that ran behind the houses. I had no idea it even existed. Every other house, it seemed, had an old mangy dog tied up to a tree or to a rotten old doghouse. Something about the whole atmosphere made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. Just past all those shacks, there was an old cornfield, overgrown with weeds and brush. Hanging onto a wood post was a pitiful-looking scarecrow with only one arm raised, like he was trying to hitchhike his way out of that place. Next to that cornfield, sitting way back off the road, was a decrepit white 3-story wood house. All the windows in that house were broken out, and you would need a machete to get to the front door. But it's still a pretty impressive house among shacks. The old house looked like it'd been quite something in its time. It made me want to do some research to find out about its history. The next day after I saw that old house, I was telling some of my school friends about it. One of my friends said, "Hey, that's the Old Lockhart House." Then he said with a smile, "I've heard it's haunted." Well, neither of us believed in ghosts or haunted houses, but we'd both seen how creepy that place looked. I wanted to find more information about it, but I wasn't sure where to go for that information. I had seen some of the Lockharts at the school, and I knew they couldn't really live in that house. Or could they? Well, a few weeks later, I was discussing the house again with some school friends when I heard someone laughing at me. It was Chris Mullins. Chris was a muscular, good-looking guy with more than just a little Native American blood in him. He was one of the stars of the football team. Pretty nice guy. And one of the few jocks who would actually spend any amount of time talking to someone like me. "That's a great make-out place," he said. "Get you a girl down there. She gets all scared. You tell her you'll protect her. She'll do pretty much anything you want." Personally, I don't think Chris Mullins ever needed a scary house to get a girl to do whatever he wanted her to, but it was a nice tip anyway. "I'm taking Jenny Quarles down there Friday after the game," he said. "The only scary thing she needs to worry about is in my pants," he said. And we all laughed. The football game that Friday night was on the night before Halloween. It was against one of our biggest rivals from the county next over. We won that game easily, and the celebrations went on way into the night. But I decided to head on home a bit early. It was dark, blustery outside. There's a full moon's light that would appear and then disappear behind fast-moving dark clouds. I thought about what Chris Mullins said about taking Jenny Quarles to the Old Lockhart House. In fact, I couldn't get it out of my mind. I thought maybe I could just drive right by the place and look over, see if I could see him there. I wondered if he really had the guts to go there, or if he was all just talk. So I decided I'd drive past the Lockhart House and then circle around and come back home. I hit the old gravel road right about the time I heard a train horn sounding in the distance. By the time I got to the part where the road curved around and crossed the track, the train was coming fast, so I sat and waited for it to pass. When it was gone, I listened to the silence for a few minutes. There's nothing like the deep, dead silence of the country after a train passes through. I drove on past the trailers and the shacks and up to the cornfield when I noticed something very strange. That old scarecrow was gone. I could see the weathered old post standing there in the field, but the scarecrow was nowhere to be seen. Maybe it had fallen down, I thought, or maybe Chris was using it as part of his plan to get Jenny all scared and clingy. Up ahead, I could see a car parked off the road in front of the house, but no one was in it. I drove past it slow, looked inside, and the front and the back seats were empty. Well, surely Chris Mullins wasn't brave enough to take her inside the house, or stupid enough. I pulled my car off to the side of the road and turned off the engine and the lights. I rolled down the window to see if I could hear any voices, outside air smelled like dead leaves, dirt, and dogs and old engine oil. The light from the moon was starting to spend more time behind the clouds, leaving everything in a deep indigo darkness. If you've never heard the death scream of a hog at midnight, that'll send shivers over every inch of your body. And it's worse when you're far away from anything you recognize. It's even more terrifying when you realize that the scream you just heard wasn't a hog at all, but it's human, and it's coming right toward you. Jenny Quarles tried to open the passenger door while she screamed, but it was locked. She jumped onto the hood of my car and pounded on the windshield like she intended to go right through it. It took me several seconds to recognize it was her, and when I did, I jumped out of the car. In one leap, she jumped on me, and her legs gave out from under her. All the while, she's still screaming. I tried to calm her down best I could and ask her what was going on. She couldn't speak, but she grabbed my hand and pointed it toward the Lockhart House. She could only say, "Chris," and pulled me toward the house. A small path had been trampled into the weeds and brush in front of the house, and Jenny pulled me along the path. It was all happening too quick to think about it. But nowadays, I can't even believe I went into all that jungle. We tripped and stumbled our way to the side of the old house where there was a clearing under some tall, twisted trees. Jenny pointed to one of the trees and again let out a shrill scream. On the dirt under the tree was a scattering of straw covered in blood. Hanging from one of the trees was Chris Mullins. His throat was cut from earlobe to earlobe. I grabbed Jenny's arm, ran back toward the car, faster than I'd ever run before. It's a good thing Jenny was a small girl, because when we hit that tangled path of vines, I drug her along behind me, even after she tripped and fell several times. We got into the car and sped off to my house, where we called the police and Jenny's parents. It was several months before Jenny Quarles was able to fully relay the events of that night to anyone. She and Chris Mullins had left the school after the football game, drove to a convenience store where Chris's brother was the manager. He would sell him some beer. Chris told Jenny he wanted to take her to his house, and then he drove to the Old Lockhart House, jokingly telling her it was where he lived. They parked the car, sat on the hood, and drank a couple of beers under the moonlight. After they made out a while, Chris suggested they walk up to the house. Well, Jenny didn't think that was such a good idea, so Chris made a bet with her. Jenny had to agree she'd go up to the house if Chris could hit the old scarecrow with all 4 of their empty beer bottles. Even in the darkness, Chris proved to be quite the athlete, as each bottle landed squarely on target, the last one almost taking off the old scarecrow's head. Jenny reluctantly went up to the dark old house with